member of City Legislative Affairs, where he negotiated more than 100 pieces of legislation related to justice reform and public safety, housing and buildings, civil rights, and youth development. He served as Deputy Chief of Staff to then Council Member Jumaane Williams and as Legislative and Communications Director to Assembly Member Linda D. Rosenthal. His career began as an appointed commissioner with the City of Berkeley, California, where he served as chair of the Commissioner on Labor and as the mayor's appointee to the Housing Advisory Commission. Please welcome Nick Smith. I also want to welcome Dr. Rob Gore, who's an attending physician and clinical assistant professor at Kings County Hospital, SUNY Downstate Department of Emergency Medicine in Brooklyn, New York. Dr. Gore is the assistant program director for the Kings County SUNY Downstate Emergency Medicine Residency Program for 4 years. He's the founder and currently the executive director of CAVI, Kings Against Violence Initiative, a hospital and school-based youth violence intervention prevention and empowerment program targeting teens that have been injured as a result of violence or at risk for violent and recurrent violent injury. He's the founder and director of the Minority Medical Student Emergency Medicine Summer Fellowship, which is mentoring and enrichment program for the underrepresented minorities interested in emergency medicine with a focus on project development. Now let's please welcome I want to welcome David Mann, who is a site manager for Man Up. He works in the hospital intervention services that Man Up provides. Man Up was built around an evidence-based model to reducing gun violence called Cure Violence, which has 3 main approaches: interrupting the transmission of violence by preventing potentially violent situations from occurring, identifying and providing support to those who are at high risk of participating in violence, and mobilizing the community to create safer and more supportive neighborhoods. Please welcome David Mann. And of course, I want to welcome my colleague, Shana Harrison, Director of Education for New Yorkers Against Gun Violence Education. Shana has designed, developed, and led New Yorkers Against Gun Violence school-based youth education program called the Reaction Program for over a decade. She has taught Reaction to over 3,000 students. I actually think that's too low. It's way more than that. Engaged youth and communities across New York City and throughout New York State, trained new facilitators, and influenced a generation of anti-gun violence advocates, and emerged as a widely recognized and respected movement leader. Shana's strong connection to underserved communities of color and youth, and her talent engaging with young people have made her a sought-after speaker and highly effective classroom presence. Prior to working at NYAGV, she was a certified mediator working with the Crown Heights Mediation Center, now called Neighbors in Action, and a crisis intervener and youth court coordinator with the Murray Bergtraum High School. Please welcome Shana Harrison. So we really want this to be a community conversation, and I'm obviously going to ask some questions initially to our panelists, but I hope that if you have questions, even while the conversation is going on, please raise your hand. We'd be happy to incorporate your questions and answer them as we go. So first I'd like to start with you, Dr. Gore. Our medical professionals know firsthand the impact of gun violence, particularly in our communities here. Can you tell us more about the work that you're doing at CAVI and why it's so effective?
So as a healthcare provider, I've been a physician for about 17 and a half years, and I went into medicine to focus on not just combating illnesses and disease processes and dealing with trauma, but really helping create a framework on what constitutes wellness. And we start looking at that point of view, it starts to impact on all these other health disparities that present in our departments of emergency medicine and our hospitals. We created CAVI. Actually, we are celebrating our 8.5 years of actual programming, but started the organization back in 2009 to provide services for people who were coming from marginalized spaces that were impacted by trauma. The work we do really focuses on reframing this entire conversation around trauma itself, not just gun violence. As a matter of fact, I don't usually even speak solely about gun violence because whether it's a knife injury, whether it's blunt trauma, that's intentional, whether it's a gun, it all often comes from the same positions. And so looking at identifying those things or some of the things that we have to do in order to kind of curb these issues. So CAVI has three different elements of it. We have a hospital-based program, a school-based program, and a community-based program. I'm actually fortunate today to be with some of our partners in our hospital-based intervention, the team members from Man Up. We provide the intervention services for people who've been injured who present to our Department of Emergency Medicine, as long as it's intentional trauma. We see the patient in the emergency department, we see them and follow them up on the trauma wards, and even follow up with the patients after they've been discharged. Not just preventing retaliation from occurring, but really helping provide services for the patients and their families. Kind of thinking about what constitutes wellness. When somebody's been injured, when someone's been traumatized, there are a whole host of emotions that come up. And if you're already coming from a marginalized community and have had issues with violence and trauma your entire life, or it's even been vicarious and has been passed down from generation to generation, you're dealing with a lot of issues. And so we are there to help kind of provide a segue to work with our social workers and behavioral health specialists so that these patients and participants and their families have access to mental health services. Our school program was created because I didn't want to treat patients. And so, why do we have to access people within the community when something is wrong? And so we launched our school-based initiative to focus on young people who are considered to be at risk for engaging in interpersonal violence, which is technically every kid who lives in Brooklyn, not even just the central Brooklyn community. We have a 32-week curriculum that we do in some of the schools. We have close to 200 kids that we are working with at present, and our curriculum focuses on mediation, conflict resolution, and restorative justice, in addition to life skills development. A lot of the things that we want to make sure that our participants have access to resources and develop certain skills that allow them to tackle issues that may affect their health and well-being, especially as it relates to violence and interpersonal conflict. And then our community program, last but not least, focuses on the education. So we work with other community groups and other community leaders to help train them in what we call trauma-informed care, which is a very tailorized approach to dealing with violence. It's not just focusing on the physical wounds, which is what we already do in our emergency departments and our trauma departments, but looking at both the physical aspects of trauma and violence, but looking at the psychosocial needs that often come along with people who've been traumatized.
So I actually have a follow-up question to that, because I think there's a really important distinction that sometimes people in the policy space talk about how guns kill people, not people, and that the NRA's position on the mentally ill is inaccurate, which is true. In fact, on the whole, those who've been diagnosed with a mental illness are not generally indicators of violence. Only 3% of those who've been diagnosed with a mental illness may be prone to actually committing a crime. On the other hand, when you talk about trauma and PTSD and the cycle of violence that affects communities that are marginalized, you can't have that conversation without talking about mental health support. That doesn't necessarily mean that that individual is mentally ill or crazy, right, which is the term that the NRA will use and also our president, but it does mean that we have to be able to understand that nuance, or we're ignoring communities that really do need that support because they have access to guns, and without it there might be an issue. Can you talk about, a little bit more about the trauma and what that looks like and how you know if someone's high risk?
Right. So after anybody who's been injured, whether you are walking down the steps and fall and tumble face first down a flight of steps or 2 flights, which is some of the stuff that we see in the hospital, you will suffer from some sort of acute stress response. Now, people kind of use PTSD anytime somebody's been injured violently. PTSD is something that happens at least like 4 to 6 weeks after someone has been dealing with this continuous response. And if we were to classify, if we were to kind of dissect our own personas, everyone in this room, we probably be diagnosed with some sort of mental illness. Whether it's, or at least have, I shouldn't say an illness, or I have elements that would require some assistance, whether it's anxiety, whether it's dealing with just chronic stress, dealing with depression. Some people may even have been affected by bipolar disorder, and they may be functional right now, but anytime you have an acute stressor and another stressor, it lowers the threshold for which these symptoms start manifesting themselves. And so we start looking at, the whole issue revolving on violence, in the United States and violence within our community is kind of a touchy issue. And some of us feel a particular way because now all of a sudden there's a dialogue that's happening about violence and violence, violence, and say we need to do something about these guns. But you've had communities, many of which the communities in which many of us in here are from, but also communities in which we work in that have been affected by violence and trauma for generations. We can't even just talk about the 21st century, 20th century. This is stuff that's going back, even if you're looking at the whole period of enslavement within the United States. So people were dealing with trauma for a long time, but now all of a sudden, because it's affecting populations that may be a little bit more affluent, who have never had to deal with some of these systemic issues, at least not on a large scale, now all of a sudden it's a problem. The same thing happened with crack cocaine, the same thing happened with heroin. And so some of our community members, and even some of us, don't always gravitate towards the policy realm as it relates to gun control, because it's kind of like, okay, are you really in it to help me out and the people who are my loved ones who are being impacted and affected, or is it only to make sure that your own personal safety is maintained, particularly in areas that we aren't welcome to come in? And so we kind of have that back and forth thing. But kind of back to this whole response, we start talking about stress in the community. Everyone deals with stress, and stress isn't always problematic, but when you don't get a chance to process it, that's when it becomes a problem. And that's what we're seeing within our communities. When that stress response happens over and over again, people make bad decisions. People make bad decisions when they're stressed, and stress is meaning I don't have enough to eat. Stress means I don't know where I'm going to sleep. Stress means that I just lost my loved one. Stress can mean I've lost loved one after loved one after loved one, and I don't have a safe space to go or a person to talk to process this stuff, and so I'm taking this home. So anytime someone comes up to me and they ask me a question, and they're asking me why am I hypervigilant, it's because I've never processed this stuff. And so one of the reasons why we bring up the issue revolving around mental health and wellness, particularly in trauma, is because if we don't address those issues, these problems will continue. And just like crack, just like heroin, just like K2, this stuff will infiltrate other communities. And so incorporating mental health practices is a key issue, not just as it relates to trauma and violence, but overall systemic wellness. And we can kind of talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Dr. Gore. So I think that's actually a good way of segueing to David Mann and the work that you do with Man Up. I know that there's some crossover between the work that you, Man Up sometimes does with CAVI, and also Man Up also works with New Yorkers Against Gun Violence now. Can you tell us generally what the philosophy of the organization is, and then more about the violence interruption work that of the individuals that you manage?
Well, the philosophy of the organization is to respond to community emergencies. We are the first responders on the ground, and we are the ones who most likely will know the individuals that's involved with different types of violence. Also, the work that we do is in a three-part. Is a before. We like to get in front of the violence to try to prevent it, and we do that by canvassing the community, engaging the stakeholders in the community, which are the residents, the business owners, the faith-based leaders, and whoever have volume and interest in the community. So we educate them, and we disseminate palm cards and leaflets about gun violence. And I would like to take the gun violence out of it and just say violence, because we're coming from a public health approach, and when you're using language, when you use the word gun, it can take away and paint a different picture. And that probably can stop us from getting certain funding or people buying into the program. But violence is violence, if you have a weapon, or you can use a weapon. So I just like to say that it's an anti-violence approach. And also, and during conflict or during a shooting or something like that, we like to educate. We educate the community of what to do. First, you should find safety. If there's like an active shooting situation going on, and After that, down 911 when it's safe. And if you can help anyone else that's in trouble, help them when it's safely, when it's safe to do that. And the third thing is after the situation, we like to address the community and address the traumas that come out of it. I just attended the Bloomberg Health Summit in Baltimore, and there was a young brother there, and he was speaking about metaphorically creating a vaccine, talking about if anybody was exposed to some type of trauma or some of their loved ones got hurt or anything like that, that we should start servicing them if they like 7 years old, addressing these type of traumas instead of them growing up and not releasing this trauma and the fears and stuff that come with it. So the young brother was kind of brilliant. I'm just honored to repeat that here. So just, addressing the community norms and letting them know that violence is not normal.
That's very helpful, just kind of painting a picture of what that looks like. I think that, one of the things that we talk about a lot is that often perpetrators of violence have been victims themselves, whether they've been directly affected by gun violence or they know someone who's been affected by gun violence, so they're a survivor themselves, and that
Yes.
cycle can take place. In fact, because of that trauma, they might be more likely to pick up a gun if they have access to it.
Yes.
I definitely want to come back to you at some point. People should definitely ask David some more questions about the work that he's doing with street intervention and hospital intervention. Moving to Shayna, Shayna, will you talk more about what you're doing in the schools and what is helpful in connecting with young people who are coming to school, but also live in these same communities that are most impacted?
Thank you guys for having me. I'm excited to be here, especially sitting on this panel and just listening to everyone today, because it's amazing how much our work intersects, right? Most of us work together, most of us have some of the same students, but I have been working with New Yorkers Against Gun Violence for over 10 years, starting with creating this program called the Reaction Program, which young people created the name. It's them reacting to the gun violence that happens in their community. The program started off as an after-school program at the High Schools of Public Service in Crown Heights. I know Kavi has a program there as well. And it was an amazing program. It was one of the largest programs in the after-school space. And honestly, I think it was a really amazing program just because it allowed young people to talk about their own experiences with gun violence, right? It was one of the only programs that actually let young people be experts. Because unfortunately they are experts on the issue because they are disproportionately affected by it, right? So it changed the narrative a little bit. It kind of put young people in a position where, me as an adult, I had to listen, to where the guns were coming from and why young people were picking up the guns, right? It actually, it just changed the dynamic that wasn't necessarily there before. We saw a lot of success in the program as an after-school program, but we realized that we were reaching a demographic of young people that probably wasn't necessarily picking up the guns. However, they were just, they still lived in the same communities. They were just making different decisions not to pick up the guns. We understand that it's extremely important to work with that group of young people as well, because they are just one choice away from whether, being a victim to gun violence themselves or actually picking up a gun. But we knew that we wanted to, work with a demographic of young people who maybe came a little bit closer to gun violence. So we worked really hard to make sure that the Reaction Program was, would be able to be offered to a larger group of young people. So the program went from being an after-school program to a day school program. And it's actually offered as a 4-credit class. We look at gun violence as a public health issue. So we work directly with health teachers, law teachers, social studies teachers, lawyers. We figure out a way to, write curriculum around whatever subject, whatever classroom we're in. And it's unfortunate that you can do that, right? Because if you think about gun violence and how it intersects with so many other parts of our lives, we can talk about it in that way. So right now we are, in the school as if we were like just a normal health subject. So we're seeing 90 kids a day. We have a 32 lesson curriculum, a lot like Kavi, that is broken up into 4 different parts: personal development, group development, education, and advocacy. It's really important for us to understand that Reaction is a place for young people to talk about their trauma. that they go through in their communities, but in the same token, not just talk about the trauma and understand it and unpack it, but actually to understand what to do with it. And how can you use your trauma and your own personal story to protect yourself, your community, and the world just in general. So the program is broken up, like I said again, in 4 different parts: personal development, group development, education, advocacy. The personal development and group development is kind of my favorite part, I know, only because I've seen so many wonderful things happen in that space. We talk a lot about like biases and perceptions and race and working together and toxic masculinity and just tons of things that contribute to young people feeling powerless. And the idea of wanting to feel powerful, and that's a lot of the reasons why young people pick up guns in the first place, right? If you're in a community where you feel like that's the only result that's the only thing that you can do to kind of like change your situation, you will go towards that route. So just examining those ideas and also understanding that as an organization, we can't take our kids out of those communities that they live in, and we shouldn't have to, right? But we do understand that it's important to, challenge some of the misconceptions around gun violence and power and fear and protection. And then when you do that, you don't necessarily have to take young people out of communities, but you can actually, help them, become better advocates and change the communities that they're already in. We give out pre and post surveys in the beginning of the school year, where we ask young people questions around, their personal opinion around protection, whether guns protect them, do they know someone who owns a gun, do they know where to get guns from? And we've seen a lot of change just looking at the surveys. One thing that stays the same is that our students still, experience gun violence the way that they did when they walked in the door, right? So that doesn't change, and I wouldn't be lying if I told you that it did. It doesn't, right? However, the way that, what they see, and how they feel about their, I guess, like, their role in this space is what changes, right? A lot of them, come into the class saying that they don't necessarily feel like they can make a difference in their community when it comes to reducing gun violence. They don't leave that way, right? A lot of them actually think guns protect them. They don't leave that way. It has nothing to do with me saying that guns don't protect you. It has everything to do with them understanding what protection really is, right? And understanding why you might feel like you need a gun in the first place, and how it gives you artificial power and not necessarily, it doesn't really make you feel powerful, and the most powerful thing you have is your voice. And the young people that we work with are able to say that because of the lessons and the conversations that we're constantly having. So that's really what our personal development, group development components of our reaction program look like. We have we go into education and advocacy, and that's really just like understanding, the Second Amendment and just gun laws, and that's already on the books, things that can make their community safer. But also them understanding like what they could actually do to make their community safer. What kind of legislation do they think would work to make their community safer? We walk in with one agenda and we walk out at the end of the year really focusing on the school to prison pipeline, because that's the agenda of our young people, or they want to talk about, criminalization inside of schools and how that contributes to violence. So it's really interesting to see what happens when you give young people the tools to advocate for themselves. What kind of things that they create on their own. We take our students to Albany and to DC to speak to their elected officials about gun violence and what they can do in their community to reduce gun violence. It's a really powerful, I think just sitting back and watching what happens as as the year gradually, moves on, you see young people walking into a space not necessarily feeling like they can change what's happening in their communities and leaving as advocates and, really feeling like experts on this particular issue. We've seen so many things change. One of the results we've discovered by some of the principals that we work with is the attendance rate has gone up. The truancy intervention program has reported the truancy rates have gone down because the students cannot participate in our program if they don't come to school. I had students only come to my class and leave. Right, or it's a hot mess. But I think the principal, realized what was happening and actually used, our program as like a bargaining tool. Like, if you want to come here, you have to come to class. Like, so we've seen that happen. And sometimes it's like people like say all the time, like, this is such a great program. What are you guys doing? We're just like we're giving young people space to be seen and to be heard and to actually process the trauma that they are dealing with every single day. And I think that that's one thing that they just want to be seen, and they also, you know, definitely want a space to do the work. So that's what the Reaction program really does, and it's been extremely successful. I'm really happy to be working now with the crisis management system, like NANUP, and a bunch of other other organizations in the crisis management system. We're going to be rolling out the Reaction curriculum. We're a small organization, but we are very powerful, and we are very excited that we get to work with, you know, other people who are in the communities, who are credible messengers and doing this amazing work. So.
Thank you, Shana.
Thank you.
You know, just to quickly expand on what Shana said, and I think this will be a good segue to the Deputy Public Advocate to talk about the crisis management system and explain to you what that is if you don't know here in New York City. But, you know, one of the things that we're really committed to at New Yorkers Against Gun Violence is collaboration. And when we see that, you know, there are other community partners or other organizations that have that credibility and have that access in the community, we want to create a partnership. And so we're working with the city, and we're working with MANUP and different violence intervention organizations to provide our curriculum to give them, you know, another option in schools, while we're also kind of learning from them and, you know, using those partnerships to understand how to best connect with the young people in those communities, because they really have the credibility and know the communities, in fact, better than we do. So it's really been, it's an effective partnership, and we're now growing from 7 to hopefully 40 new schools that our program will be utilized in over the next 2 years.
That's great.
So Nick, it would be wonderful if you would tell us a little bit more about what this crisis management system is, how the different city agencies work on that, and why they've identified that as being such an important element of reducing gun violence here in New York City.
Sure. So the problem with 4 billion speakers is, and going last is, you know, you said everything. Just kidding. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Rebecca, and my co-panelists. So let's start from, before I get to the CMS, the federal landscape. We know that, you know, there are mass shootings, unfortunately, every week, periodically, and there are gun violence incidents all the time in all communities. So the question is, you know, what is the federal government doing? And we know we're at a place where we probably won't have much action from the president and his Congress because of the stalemate, right? So the issue is, where do we go from there? Cities. Cities are the laboratories of creative solutions to help solve the issue of gun violence. And you referenced the CMS. This is called the Crisis Management System. So back in 2012, Councilmember Jumaane Williams and Councilmember Cabrera from Manhattan got together with a couple of nonprofits that deployed violence interrupters into our communities, into precincts that had the highest numbers of shootings across, I think back then it was 6 precincts. We persuaded the administration to put in $6 million to set up these nonprofits. So the nonprofits have a couple of functions. One, hire folks who have been involved in violence in their own spaces and turn their lives around. These are the people, I call them peers, that are best suited to engage with folks who may engage in certain behaviors that, you know, we're talking about today. So there's the issue of bringing peers to interact with those who may be, quote, at risk. Secondarily, the program has a school conflict mediation component. So when the young people are learning how to deal with issues in their own lives, if you're 10, 11, 12, you may not know just yet how best to deal with conflicts that arise at school or at home. So the system sends in mediators, literally professionals, to go into the schools to engage with our kids and show them you don't have to engage in gun violence or any act of violence. There is a way to engage with folks who think you have wronged them. So it's a conversation. It's restorative justice. It's a way of engaging folks that avoids violence. Another component which Jumaane fought very hard for, and I'm very proud of it, jobs. If we talk about holistic approach to solving gun violence, it isn't just sending police into these neighborhoods. It is looking at going to the root cause of violence, which is there may be a lack of safe and clean and affordable housing. There may be issues inside the family which kids don't want to talk to you about, but there may be something causing some stress, as Dr. Gore went into earlier. And employment. If you can't feed your family, you may be more likely to get involved in violence. That's just a fact. And so a component of the program, we got summer jobs for kids and also seasonal employment. So that's almost year-round employment for our young people as a part of this program, and that has been one of the most impactful parts of the CMS system. And finally, there is therapeutic mental health programs in our schools as well. So there's arts programming that we deploy into these sites. So that is sort of the writ large image of the CMS, and I'm sitting with providers in this program that are doing a fantastic job. So when we say get creative and reduce gun violence, this is how the city sees how we can go around the federal government. The state passed great bills in terms of background checks, that's great, but get local, spend the money locally. So CMS to me is one of the most effective ways of reducing gun violence, and I hope folks will check the website out. It's right now we're at $36 million. So between 2012, 6 million. $36 million. These nonprofits are just so effective. We should give these guys a
In response to that, it is such an important thing that there is so much support from the city, and it's important that the city hears from its constituents, regardless of what district you live in. So, if you're concerned about gun violence in New York City and you don't live in a community that's directly impacted, now you know a little bit more about what to talk to your city council member about, because they have the ability to lobby the Public Safety Committee and talk about how to increase funding overall. And I think that, sometimes if you don't live in a community that's directly impacted, you're kind of thinking about big picture and you're thinking about policy, and you feel a bit helpless about how you can have a direct impact. Or you feel like, okay, I don't live in that community, so it's not my problem. And I think that especially as more attention is put on, which we need to do, on the Brownsville mass shooting, right, which we're calling a mass shooting, or the uptick of violence in Southeast Queens, those are all of our communities, and there's more that we can do to support these programs to help continue preventing gun violence. And also at the state level, there are some comparable programming in other cities that are affected in this way. It's called SNUG as a part of the state budget. But to be honest with you, New York City is really the leader on it. There are not nearly as many community-based programs like there are in New York City, in Albany or in Rochester and Buffalo or in Troy, New York. And we need to pay more attention to that as using New York City as a model to help create the same kind of programming and intervention methods and prevention in schools across the state. So whether it's private dollars or government dollars, it's something that you can think about directly doing. So now that we've heard from each of our panelists, we kind of want to open it up to the audience. Feel free to ask any question that's on your mind. I certainly can answer policy questions too, but I really hope that we'll direct most of our questions towards some of the work that we've talked about tonight. Yes?
All right. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for all the work you do. I really can't quantify the admiration I have for you. You up on this stage. It's truly incredible. And as a fellow New Yorker, I really appreciate you guys representing the city in such an amazing way. So thank you for that. Mr. Mann, I was just curious if you could expand more about your process, walk us through what steps you would take if there was an active violent situation going on.
Like in what type of space?
I guess the gang violence on a street corner. For
Well,
example.
we have specialists that we call VIs. They are called violence interrupters, and these people are very familiar with the street activities and the players that play the part. So they have a way of talking them down, disengaging them, giving them a couple of seconds to think it over before committing a crime. And the VIs are also people who come from that type of lifestyle. So the people see if the VI is a person that they can look up to, that they can say, you know what, if he's doing it, I can do it. And that's part of what the violence interrupter do. And then the OW is the outreach worker who canvass the community too, and they're the ones that sign them up into like work programs and stuff like that, and stuff to keep them busy. Like getting a driver's license or getting a library card. You know, just to make them feel like they're worth something. I also like to say that, you know, in 2 of our target areas, we went over 2 years without a killing, but just 2 days ago it was a shooting and it turned into a homicide. And we had to go to the school today to do a school response. And when I asked the class, the students in the classes, did anybody come to counsel them? And they said no. So this is the type of services that we're getting in our community. So our Man Up team, our Caravans team, we went into the school and we counseled the students, but it seemed like this was like normal to them. You know, when I asked, you know, it was just like, this is a normal thing that happened in the community.
So we're really lucky actually because Jeremy Arce, alto brother Curly, is here with us tonight. We've been working with Man Up and Jeremy in the schools, and we'd love to hear from you more directly about the violence interruption work that you've been doing and, you know, your own experience.
Well, good evening, first of all. And Hotep, when I say Hotep, I mean, you see some of my comrades in the crowd say in the back, when Man Up Incorporated says that, let's just always say peace. Hello, how you doing? Good evening. We come in peace, we leave in peace. It's a motto that we live by, and that's what we try to preach while we walk through this journey. So a little bit about the work I do. And she said my name is Jeremy. I'm from East New York. I've been with Man Up Incorporated for about 4 years, and we've just been lucky to be doing this. Dr. Gary Sluckin was, with the work that he did, he was able to basically define violence as a disease. And once he was able to do that, some of my brothers from Chicago, Marcus McCall and the Cure Violence International Corporation there, was able to come up with an antidote for the disease called Cure Violence, which is a 3-pronged model. And how that basically goes is that when we train what we call credible messages to be able to detect violence at its core, and then once we define it and detect it, we to go out and deploy the team to interrupt it. Then once we interrupt it, we try to administer the antidote to cure it by providing resources like job development, like the brother Dawood said, we're in the school-based programs, we're in the juvenile detention centers, we're all over the place, so to speak, right now. So that's just a little bit about the work that we do.
What do you, I mean, I think it's important to kind of expand on what makes a messenger credible. You know, I
Exactly.
think a lot of people think, okay, the police or a teacher or another force of authority needs to come in and tell a person who's engaged in violence to stop engaging in violence and that's going to be effective. And what you're saying is someone who's credible, what makes them credible?
So what makes us credible is the fact that we have been there, done that, so to speak. As an organization, man, I think we make sure that we go through a long process while we're vetting out certain individuals, certain key individuals that used to be high risk or may still be high risk, and we look for certain key attributes that that person may have or characteristics that they have. And you know, the streets, they just kind of respect them in that way. The schools respect them in that way because they can relate to them or they can kind of meet them where they're at. And then we're also trained to, you know, we ask certain questions, like we had a skill set called motivational interviewing, where we sit down and we just basically ask open-ended questions to get them to open up, and we can figure out where we can meet them halfway and figure out exactly what they need. Because we know that we just can't go into a home or find a troubled individual or a high-risk individual and then tell them what to do. We may think that we know what's the best thing for someone to do, but that's not the truth. We have to basically figure out what they want in life, right? Try to highlight some key attributes, because even if, say, for example, young individuals out in the street selling drugs, that's unfortunate, but at the same time, I like to believe that you can find a positive in any negative. So selling drugs come with a skill set, right? Right? You know what I'm saying? And then you distribute it, and you employees, right? So those skills are transferable over to the workforce, right? Marketing, right?
Sales.
We laugh at it, but it's real. It's real. And once you're able to tap into that and make that clear to them, that, because I'm not into excuses. Everybody want to say, oh, the streets this, the white man this, that, and, you know, the system. Okay, I get all of that, but stop it. Let's figure out where we at. Let's figure out where we started. Let's figure out where we want to be. And let's figure out a plan. Let's build that plan. I got a whole team. We sit down there. We bring them in. We treat them like family. You know, we're hotepping each other. Everywhere you see the green, they feel a love. So everywhere you go, we're in the household with their mother and their parents. We're helping them with the plan. And you have to reach out to me. We set up what's called a risk reduction plan. As we go through it, we go into the system. And even if a young brother or sister doesn't want to do anything, or it may seem like they don't want to do anything, we still just work on the small things like changing their behavior or changing their mindset. Then once they start doing that and they feel like they might want to leave the pistol home, or they feel like they have better ways to handling conflict other than resorting to violence, then we're getting somewhere. Right? To me, that's the beginning of the success. After that, we take them to the Ready for Work program, which is a 2-week program. We get them job ready, teach them how to articulate themselves on interviews, teach them how to dress, how to do a proper handshake. You know, the small things that may have been missed throughout their lifetime. They just may have been deprived from, or might not have been lucky enough to have those. And then, you know, we go deep into it. We do financial literacy training. We do all it never stops, right? We're talking about credit scores. We're talking about bank accounts. We're just developing our own, developing the high-risk individuals as well as developing ourselves. And we take these classes and we go through it with them. We don't just say, okay, this is the program you need to go to. Make sure you go there at 9:30. No, we're up at 9:30 in the morning. We're with them, meeting them. We're meeting them with tea and muffins, and they laugh. Okay, eat that, brother, because we got a nice little long day going on. I'm here with you, you know, because you know sometimes you get in front of a computer. Some people just may not tell you their fears, or they might not even understand them themselves. Like some people, some of our youth, unfortunately, from my neighborhood, are scared of computers. You sit there, open and do your resume, they freeze up. They freeze up. You have to do your homework, and slowly but surely you get to know these things, and you pick up on them, and then you develop them, and then you give them a little push, not too hard, just a little push, enough for them to take that first step, and then you get them confident. Then once they got it, they got it. And then we can write that up as a success story, and then we can clap it up for that. You know?
Any other questions?
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I remember I think it was way back in the 90s, that they was interviewing this young kid, and he shot somebody, and they asked him, why did you shoot him? He goes, because he was going to get me. And I realized something. He felt like he was trapped. So, like when you say you meet them, that's good, because you can get them out of that situation. That's what you got to do, I guess, you know?
I mean, in a situation like that, it's dangerous because, like I said, gun violence is just normalized in my community.
Yeah.
So when you have a disagreement with somebody, unfortunately, the first thing that we're taught to do, or we've learned to do, is go and get that to handle the situation. It's not the conversation that's coming from. We don't even think that. But the good thing about Man Up Inc. and the brother Dr. Gore and other people that's doing this work, we understand it. So once we Incredible Messages, the neighborhoods respect us. So instead of calling maybe the police department or someone else, they'll call Brother Curly, or they'll call one of my sisters and brothers that do the work with us and say, hey, listen, this individual got into an altercation in the street. I think you might need to check this out, right? That's called our enroll. We use the enroll, and then we go and meet him where we're at, calm one of the brothers down. One of my sisters might have a good relationship with one party and versus the other, and then we say, listen, okay, I understand that you're on defense. You feel like he's gonna come and get you. But give me a second. Give me a day or two. Lay low. Stay in the house. You can trust me. I have somebody that knows the brother. They're gonna go talk to them to make so that he knows that you're not trying to take it down that route. And then that person goes and does that work on the other end. See, it's a whole team of us that we attack it with a strategy, and it's so special. And then like even with stuff like that, those two people that might have wanted to kill each other yesterday, after we start doing the work, one is working, one is just, getting better with the mind, and then before you know it, they're standing on the same block, on the same corner, having a conversation about the basketball game last night. You know what I'm saying? And it's just beautiful to see it happen. When it's working, when you have a serious team that's out there and really attacking it, then it works. It works. The numbers show.
I think, can I one point to that really quickly? I think what Jeremy is getting at is the idea of humanization. When we talk about CMS and deploying all these resources, I think what we're really saying is, I see you. You may have made a mistake, but you are still a human being, and we still care about you. And let's not isolate our young people who have made a mistake, because when you do that, then you only push them away and encourage them to engage in behaviors that's not so great. Let's humanize our young people, and that's what I hear you say.
That's right, exactly.
One thing Brother Curley talks about, he didn't actually say it, but it's something that I've seen evident with Man Up and all the different organizations that are represented up here. is the consistency. We're working, and the reason why I bring this stuff up because there's some people who we're hoping in this room will become allies and other comrades who will continue on with these fights in their respective communities. Whether you're a community that if you live in a marginalized space, if you're in a gentrifying community. Matter of fact, when you're in those spaces where you have the haves and the have-nots, that's when a lot of conflict tends to occur, and that's when the further marginalization happens, and that's when higher rates of conflict start happening as well. But the consistency has to be there. The people that we work with who are actually our friends, our family, our neighbors, many of them are used to people not showing up. And so when you bring that muffin, you bring that bagel, you bring that cup of tea, and you say, I'm gonna make this phone call for you, or I'm gonna meet you here tomorrow, and you show up, and then you tell them another thing, and then you show up again, and you show up again, that builds a different kind of trust. And that's not the norm. Like they're expecting you not to show up, and so when you do, it's a shock to their chakra, and they're like, "Wow, it's mind blowing," because they've never had that level of consistency. They know all the acronyms of different organizations. They know social workers. They know guidance counselors. They know ACS. There was a student who saw ACS on a board, and it said it was actually the American Academy of Cardiologists or something like that. He's like, "Oh, ACS, that's where the people who come and take you away." And it was like, "No, it's just something about smoking cessation." But so they know some of these things, and they can make all these correlations. But the one thing that many of them don't often have is the consistency with people who are investing in it. We also have to look at it from the point of view is that we are capacity building. We don't want to create dependent relationships. Interdependence is okay. If we want to create synergy, that's also okay, but we don't want to create the dependent relationships. People want to be able to take care of themselves. They want to take care of them, their families, and when your basic needs aren't being met, that's when we have a lot of these problems. So every intervention that gets provided, whether it's monetary, whether it's skilled training, whether it's even just delivering food, there has to be something that's integrated in that approach that's going to allow those people who are affected and impacted to be able to create those resources for themselves. That's how we start changing the entire landscape that we have in these communities, and you start changing that income gap. You start changing those gaps of the haves and the have-nots. But that capacity building, and that's something that my background is also in the global health arena, and that's something that we've been that we've been trying to push forth. You heard a lot in Haiti. You talk about resiliency and you talk about capacity building, but the real thing is, how do you create systems that allow these communities to be able to adapt and then thrive? And so the consistency, the investments, the showing people how to fish becomes important. Heck, instead of fishing, because fishing, that stuff gets taken away after a period of time. How do you farm this land that you're already on and adapt it and terraform it to fit your community's basic needs?
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Eliza Orleans. I've been a public defender here in Manhattan for over a decade, and so I have represented a lot of people, including children, who have been charged with gun offenses here in New York, facing, mere possession of a weapon. You're facing 3.5 to 15 years in state prison, and I think that we're seeing a lot of media coverage that says that we need to address gun violence by over-policing communities and creating, threatening with incarceration, people who, this is a way, to elicit cooperation or to get guns turned over to the city or the state. And I see that as addressing one harm with another. Our criminal punishment regime is certainly not the way to address this, but how do we kind of take that narrative and put that into the media and say, we want to address this gun violence issue, but not with incarceration, which is just another trauma for the impacted communities.
I'll speak to that very briefly, and then it would be good to hear from you as an elected official. This is something that we talk a lot about from a policy perspective, as a policy expert on gun and firearm regulation. We need to be looking at that right next to criminal justice reform, and in the past they've sort of been looked at as very different and sometimes often conflicting issues, so much so that I think in marginalized communities of color, there's very much suspicion and understandable concern about firearm regulations, because they often come along with high penalties, and that can lead to more incarceration. And so as New Yorkers Against Gun Violence is an advocacy organization, we're trying to look at this more holistically. Every piece of legislation that we do look at, we look at the penalty, we look at not only who it's gonna help, but who it could potentially hurt. And we're also this session looking at other types of legislation that fold into education reform and criminal justice reform as a path towards preventing gun violence. Perhaps you can talk more specifically about policing and what that should and shouldn't look like
Sure.
in the city.
So the franchise voting really matters in this case. And it matters who you elect as mayor. It matters who your council members are. And why, for mayor specifically, who appoints the police commissioner? The mayor. Sure. I have a little fast talking. But the mayor chooses the police commissioner. So going back to the issue of over policing, if you recall about a decade plus ago, the police department was stopping, questioning, and frisking about 700,000 mostly Black and Latino men every single year. What does that do to the communities like Harlem, parts of Brooklyn, and the Bronx, for folks who live there? It really means that we gain a fear of walking down the street. There's a fear of racial bias by the police department, who are charged with protecting us. That is protecting our mental health. That is damaging our mental health. And so I'm very happy to say that we are finally, we're not really there yet, but we're moving slowly. Hear me out here. We're moving, it's like a Titanic. We're shifting, we're moving slowly into a space where we're recognizing over-policing does not work. It causes fear. It causes folks not to trust the police. It causes us not to call the police when we really need some kind of a response. So I get a little emotional here because I myself, so I went to law school at St. John's University. In 2009, I myself was stopped and questioned walking to law school, literally, by 2 undercover detectives. Jesus. And the only reason I was not frisked, but my roommate was because I gave the detective my state ID, and right behind it I had my law school ID. And while the detective was frisking my friend Jay, the guy in front of me saw my law school ID and thought, he literally said, "We gotta go." Oh God. What is that? What could that do to my psyche as a Black man in this city? It could mean that I, again, am afraid to walk down the street. So I'm blessed to be in a space of policy making to help shift that Titanic in a space where we are not over-policing, and we are funding programs like the CMS that helps engage our young people. Does that kind of get to what you're asking?
If I could, I mean, just to be 100% honest, there's always going to be 2 sides of this problem. There's always going to be someone that's out there looking to benefit off of the trauma that we're experiencing in our neighborhood. So our people getting incarcerated, somebody's benefiting over that, right? And when we use the word policing, they automatically affiliate that with the NYPD or the police force, but we're policing our own community. I believe, and I think everybody at this table strongly believes that that's the way to do it. People that's from here, that understand the people from here, policing our own community. If you call one of us to help the situation versus the system or those things that we have fear of, like it's just the percentage rate for something to come out successful is way higher. It's just showing in the numbers. It really is.
Well, and to expand on that, I think one of the things I heard you say is, you know, we've been trained in our community to potentially go pick up a gun if there's a conflict. And that, from my perspective, doesn't just come out of what's happening internally. It's from a lack of trust of those who supposedly in society have been told are supposed to protect us, like the police.
I mean, and that's just another form of constant manipulation. Like we hear it in our music. We're watching it on TV. Most of the movies I watched growing up were violent. Scarface, Jews, it could go down the list. And all the music is about, excuse my language, pimping and playing with guns and stuff like that. That's what our youth are listening to. And then now it's like, when I grew up in the 90s and the 2000s, there was a lot of thug rap. And then now, the millennials, they're listening to drug rap. So all of our young individuals, they're high off of Percocet and all these prescription drugs, and they can't even function properly on a daily basis. So it's just a constant form of manipulation that's happening to them. So that's why we believe, and when I say we, I say my people, my community, that's why we believe that the first thing that comes to mind to solve a problem is violence.
And look, as the firearm regulation policy expert, I always feel it's necessary to say this. because there's an understandable acceptance that in marginalized communities there's going to be access to guns because, you know, dealers down south are intentionally targeting and trafficking them up here, that's the conversation in communities. What are the other causes of gun violence? And we also need to continue to look towards regulating those guns so they're not coming into those communities, while also supporting communities around those
I'm
issues.
glad you said that, because if you look at all the communities that's plagued by gun violence, the gun laws are strict, right? But if you look at all of the states that surround those states that have strict gun laws, their gun laws are very loose. So it's very easy, like somebody from New York City, for example, could go to Pennsylvania and purchase a gun and bring it right over here. It's not rocket science. And I personally, I don't know who Smith & Wesson is personally. I just really don't. I don't know who's making these guns or how they're getting in my neighborhood, but I know that most of the individuals from my community can get a gun 10 times faster than they can get a job.
Wow.
And, you know,
Rainey wanted to say something.
Can I also address that question? Scaring someone into not carrying a gun has never been a great deterrent to taking a gun from somebody. That's just a tool that they use to get blacks and Hispanic into the prison justice system. What we do at Man Up is we educate individuals. We teach them about the effects and consequences of those guns that they're carrying. There may be a 17-year-old kid who has a son. So what we would say to him is, listen, you know if you use that gun and hurt someone, you're going to jail and your son's going to be out here by himself. That's a consequence. We teach them about the effects. Just like your mother wants you home at night, the individual that you made hurt and harm and kill, his mother also want him home also. We get them to thinking about that. Deterrent has never been a good way. Those increasing sentences. Most of these kids who are carrying these guns don't even know about these sentencing laws. So how does that stop them from carrying guns? I just want to say, because someone made a statement, I don't buy into the fact that guns kill people. If we put a gun on that counter right there and leave it, that gun is not going to go off and hurt anyone in this room. It's not until one of us go touch it and point at one of us. People kill people. It's a mindset. Because a person can put the gun down, he can pick up a knife, he can pick a stick, he can pick up a bottle. If his mindset is that he wants to hurt and harm someone, that's what we work on. We work on changing the individual's mindset so that they don't hurt and harm anyone. But at Man Up, our main focus is gun violence. So we work on getting the guns out of these guys and these girls' hands so they don't hurt and harm anyone. And that's some of the work we do.
Exactly, and having that conversation and respecting that conversation about that mindset and understanding that access to guns may increase the likelihood that a gun will actually hurt someone, while understanding that educating and supporting someone around their mindset because access to guns is gonna be there is something that we need to be able to collaborate on as a conversation, rather than kind of speaking in two lanes, well, it's just the guns, right? We need to be able to have that intersection of ideas. And I think that that's something that is often challenging, right? As we look at this issue and this epidemic, we kind of want to look at it in one lane, and it complicates it by talking about the different issues that affect gun violence. But we have to, and if we're not, we're ignoring an entire percentage of the population that is disproportionately impacted.
I think
So-
one of the things that's really interesting too is that just thinking about the space that the reaction, program sits in, I think it looks a lot like this conversation that's happening. We'll put up on the board, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Do you agree with this? Do you disagree with this? And I think the idea is never to tell young people, well, this is the right way to think about it, but to really have an honest conversation about, where you stand on these issues and why, right? So the idea that, guns don't, obviously a gun can't get up and you shoot someone. You have to, and our idea about it is you have to personify the gun, right? To understand the power that guns have, right? Because if they didn't have power, we wouldn't necessarily need them, right? Or feel like we need them, right? So I think for young people, sometimes they've been taught a lot about personal responsibility, and personal responsibility is extremely important. But we also have to understand, why young people feel the need to pick up guns in the first place, right? And I think that having a conversation about why do guns, guns don't kill people, people kill people, and what that really means, I think for a lot of times, young people can sit down and say to you, I know that a gun, the gun isn't the one that's shooting, I'm the one that's doing it. But I can say when I have a gun in my space, I have a different mindset. it changes my mindset, right? It goes from me arguing with a friend to actually pulling out a gun because I have access to it, right? So just having real and honest conversations with young people, and sometimes you can take that, like that conversation and bring it really a lot smaller, right? We talk about like we compare guns to like crowds. Most young people you never really walk past. As a young person, you see people fighting and no one's around, right? Most times when people are, unless it's like domestic violence, because if it's domestic violence, people fight no matter what. But like most young people aren't necessarily fighting and nobody's around. If they're in school or something like that, if there's a fight, there's usually a crowd around because it gives you a sense of artificial power. And it's the same kind of artificial power that guns give you, right? So young people talk about it in that way. They about that artificial power that guns give them. They understand that, the gun is not going to just pull the trigger. You actually have to do it. But I think that we're doing our young people a disservice if we don't talk about that artificial power that guns give you, or that, the sense of power that guns give you when they're in your space, because they change your decision-making process. They just do. And it takes a very strong individual to be able to say, I'm gonna, let me think about this first before I do that. And we want to create those help create those kind of individuals, but that's a hard thing to do, all the time. So
I think what Shayna also does so effectively is that then she'll sort of put a data point on the board and have a conversation around it. For example, a lot of people don't know this, and it's kind of staggeringly stark when you hear about it. The chances of actually completing suicide with a firearm if you attempt with a gun are close to 95%. If you attempt to commit suicide with any other means, it's only 3%. A lot of people think if someone wants to kill themselves, they will. They'll figure it out. But the truth is, all the research shows that actually, if someone attempts suicide and they survive, it's much more likely that that person will get the mental health treatment that they need, and they will not try to kill themselves again. So we have the ability to actually have that conversation where we're talking about the personification of power in a gun and how it requires someone to actually pick it up to hurt somebody, but also kind of incorporating that knowledge and that understanding and where that information comes from so that people are empowered by knowledge and information and facts. Yes?
Yes, I guess I'm gonna direct my question to Shani here. I'm interested to know how early in a school curriculum you start the reaction program, and optimally, and because you've had a lot of experience, if it's not there now, where would you like to start it on a grade level?
yeah, I mean, we have started using the reaction curriculum as early as middle school, and obviously not grammar school. We noticed that we had to adapt our curriculum, which is like high school based, when we work in the middle school, to talk a little bit more about bullying and personal responsibility and things like that. But I can definitely see where, listen, we have, of course, Sandy Hook, but in the same token, I have young people running from gunshots every single day, going, to the store, and these kids are 6 and 7 years old. And I say they're running, and I also say they're not running, right? Because it's a part of just like the noise a lot of times in the community, right? Like some of them are mad that they have to go upstairs, after after there's been gunshots. Like, why do I have to go upstairs? It's over. Like they're not even fearful a lot of the times, right? So I definitely, see the reaction, program being implemented in, grade school, but I do think that, depending on where it is, it definitely would have to be modified. But I think the conversation is necessary, and no matter what space or no matter what age, the conversation needs to start very, very early, around just, fear more than anything, right? Because I think that sometimes that's the thing that's lost in this space, this idea of what are we protecting ourselves from in the first place, right? And why do we feel like we have to carry guns all the time? And also and just being afraid of each other, and just race and how that relates to gun violence, and just to domestic violence and just suicide, all of these things, and these conversations can be had with a very small child in a very different way than you would have with a 17-year-old, but still extremely relevant.
I wanna respond on that.
Yeah.
Because I know Hollywood been breeding violence into our children at a very young age. And you see the cartoons like Tom and Jerry or Looney Tunes and stuff, but they put humor on it. And then the child sit there and you see somebody who gets shot, but they don't die. So this is stemming from a very young age and being bred into us from looking at TV, and we think that we're sitting our children in front of to watch a cartoon, but the violence is being shown right there at an early age, and it's over and over and over again, especially if that cartoons become their favorite cartoon.
And then to add to that, excuse me, Dr. Blue, at Man Up Inc., we're also, with our summer camp programs and after school programs, we're working with youth as low as, 8 years old, right, Brother Dawood?
Yes.
We're doing that, right? We have the Boy Scout on the weekends, and we're just not helping
That's
them with their
5
homework.
years old.
Look, that goes as low as 5 years old. We're not just bringing these kids in and helping them with their homework like other after school programs we do. Not taking nothing away from them, but we take out the time to show young brothers how to be men. How to take care of their sisters and the ones around them. We teach them how to talk with respect. When they come in, they're saying hotep to us, right? At that age, at that young age, and we start early as 8 or 5 years old even. You know what I'm saying? And then the beautiful thing is that I have this relationship with Sister Shayna in the reaction program, and as I'm learning things from them and they're learning things from us, I'm taking some of the things that they're teaching me and bringing it down to that level as well. So we definitely have a vision where somewhere down the road, we could be able to work with the youth as soon as they start coming outside in our neighborhoods.
It seems to me between domestic violence, which is lots of colors and more frequent these days, and children who are exposed to that, and the violence that they're watching on TV, I would think that there would be definitely room at just the news. You know, I have a 10-year-old at home, and I don't watch the news when he's around because I don't want him to see half this stuff. He's too young to process it. But everybody is, so there really needs to be, there has to be an outlet to discuss things in a healthy way, ways that you're developing to discuss it. I mean, it's not a manly thing to be slapping people around.
You kind of brought up something I wanted to touch on, and that's just the media sensitization and just we've become desensitized. Brother Dawood talked about cartoons, and think about the movies that we watched as kids, and Brother Curly talked about Juice, which used to be a favorite, but it was kind of like, dang, why is that a favorite movie of mine? But looking right now, you've had so many mass shootings across the United States, and every week it seems like there's another one that's happening. And to the point that all of a sudden people go, they don't even think about it anymore. It's like, oh, another mass shooting. Oh, wow. And they just kind of take it because it's become their regular norm. And so one of the things we often talk to a lot of our students about, we have middle school students in our program and high school students and beyond, is helping them understand what they're processing. So having these dialogues, what are you watching? Trauma itself is your environment, but it's also what you see and what you hear, what you breathe, and what you discuss. And so a lot of times these triggers pop off, especially if you've grown up in a place where violence is the norm. There have been some studies out there that were looking at how young people process trauma who were living in war-torn areas. And they also looked at from students who were kids who were living in war-torn areas, or kids who all of a sudden they were safe spaces, and then all of a sudden it became a war-torn area. The people who grew up seeing it didn't necessarily have the acute stress responses as other people compared to the people who knew, who were around during a time of peace. And so, creating these spaces that dialogue can happen, but also helping them learn how to, process a lot of these large amounts of information that keep happening over and over and over and over again. Before we suffer from not enough information. Now we're suffering from too much information, which can be traumatizing itself. But right now the question is, how can we help people learn how to process and decipher what's helpful and what's not helpful, when to turn it off, when to step away, so that we can kind of just regroup and process what we've been experiencing.
To drive that point home, there's been 250 shootings since Sandy Hook in 2012.
One of the conversations that we're having across the state, whether we're in a city or a suburban area or a rural one, is about school safety and what that should look like, right? And we're all being hit with so much information about what's the best way to make our schools safer. And I don't know that we're necessarily always looking at the evidence-based programming or the evidence-based way of securing a school that will actually be helpful to our students. You know, there's a lot of talk about investing a lot of money, both government and private, in hardening our schools. And what does that look like? Is that a good investment of our money, turning our schools into prisons, right? Or there's been a lot more research recently that's come out in the news about how active shooting drills are actually traumatizing a generation of students and are not helpful in terms of prevention. So there is research showing what is going to be most effective at helping our students in schools. And some of that does involve, you know, some level of hardening our schools or creating a single point of entry. There is research on that, but it's also about creating safe and supportive, equitable schools, because the reality is a lot of these policies, while they seem like a good idea, they're sort of thought about in a vacuum of school shootings and, you know, white, more privileged communities, and then when they're actually implemented, they're having a disproportionate impact on communities of color, where you're seeing more law enforcement, untrained SROs, and you know, metal detectors and surveillance. That is just criminalizing our students and is not actually helping prevent gun violence either. So we need to look at it holistically. We really need to think about how we're distributing our money and make sure that we're looking at the evidence of what's actually working as opposed to what feels like we should be doing because we're scared.
One thing with legislation that's important, and you know, anytime you're applying for grant funding, people go, well, how long is this person going to be in your program? You know, when is there going to be like an end point? Well, it doesn't stop. Like once you're a participant in one of our programs, you're always a participant. Now your level of involvement may change based on your needs, but I think people looking at it as like, oh, well, they were in this program for 2 weeks or 3 months or 3 years, and all of a sudden they don't need to be there anymore. You always need a support system. It's just a matter of how do you help direct that other person to the next set of support system. I'm really happy to be up here with everybody. You know, Man Up and CAVI work very closely together. You know, New Yorkers Against Gun Violence also works very closely with us, particularly in our school programs. If we have a kid that we've treated in the emergency department and the CAVI is followed, but they happen to live in East New York, then we try to make sure that they can follow up with the Man Up folks. If that person lives in Crown Heights, then we try to make sure they follow up with the SOS people. There's certain programming, if they're in one of the schools in which CAVI works in, and it's a Man Up kid because he lives out in East New York, and this happens all the time. We got a lot of our students and participants are in all three programs. It's not even just, it's just going to be in one or the other. It's kind of like, what is this kid's needs for right now? Actually, we need to touch base on this. What are the parents' needs? Because if these behavioral I don't want to say modifications, but if these enhancements of social and protective and environmental factors are directed specifically towards those victims or survivors, and not directed towards the people who are their support circles, then this cycle is going to continue, and that's a major push with the crisis management system, engaging not just the participants, not just the victims, but that entire social support system to ensure their wellness continues in those respective areas.
I saw a lot of hands popping up. You've raised it a couple times.
Oh, thanks. Thank you all for this panel. It's been absolutely terrific, and I hope I can bring a similar one to my neighborhood so that we can continue this conversation.
Yes.
But I wanted to build on Eliza's question because that question was about, you know, how do we not answer the trauma of gun violence with the trauma of more incarceration? And Nick talked about elections matter, council members and mayor, and I agree, but one thing we haven't talked about is electing good district attorneys. And we have an election in Manhattan coming up in 2021, and we just obviously had one in Queens. I'm wondering, how can we all sort of center ourselves around focusing on that issue? How should we be holding district attorneys and candidates for DA accountable? And to sort of put some meat on this, the NYPD was very critical of the Brooklyn DA for the Youth and Communities in Partnership program, which is essentially a diversion program if you have help, you know, if you're charged with gun possession. Are there programs like that, expanding those, building on those? What can we do, and what should we demand of our district attorneys and district attorney candidates to not incarcerate people as the answer to gun violence?
One thing we first started doing, we created CAVI. We started working with Charlie Hines' office in Brooklyn, and Heinz's office had a program called Project Redirect, which was working with first-time violent crime offenders. The people in Project Redirect had to wear ankle bracelets, and then, while they, and their programs kind of focus on leadership and development, psychosocial support. When the person completed that program successfully, that ankle bracelet was removed and that record was expunged. And these participants were under the age of 18. We actually partnered with Heinz's office, and our program at one point was an alternative to incarceration. So if you fit certain criteria and you happen to be in one of the schools, then you had mandatory participation. Like the students had to participate in our program, and they had regular check-ins. And so if that stuff wasn't met, then there's a possibility of them re-entering the system. And so when you start looking at criminal justice reform, or I should say criminal justice reform, justice reform period, if the support spaces aren't being provided by the district attorney's office, then you're going to have a continuous surplus of clients, and not in a positive sense. And so there has to be money and funding and collaborative efforts that are occurring with the districts, with the DA's office, to ensure that programs within the crisis management system, other community-based organizations, other advocacy programs which are focusing on empowerment and engagement are supported directly by the DA's office. The goal, and I say this to my patients and to my medical students and resident physicians, the goal of any physician or educator in general should be to become obsolete. Now, I want to work myself out of this job. And Brother Curley mentioned it before, there are people who are benefiting. I'm glad you really said that. There are people who are benefiting from our demise and from our misery and our personal and collective tragedies. And so, how do you work yourself out of this job? What system do you create? What system and organizations do you support so that you don't have to have these conversations about gun violence advocacy or gun violence prevention? How do you, what do you need to do in order to make sure that you've taken away a food desert, so people aren't trying to figure out how to fight for resources just to have their basic needs met, food, clothing, and shelter. Those are the systems that have to be supported. I know people kind of think about the DA's office only focusing on crime, but crime wasn't born out of itself. Crime is born out of situations, societal factors, and these systemic issues where people's basic needs aren't being met. And so the support has to focus on those general issues. It's not sexy, and that's why people don't want to talk about it. The reason why, we have to even use the language gun violence is because nobody pays attention when we start talking about community engagement. We say, oh, we're doing an after-school program, or we have a Boy Scout troop or a Girl Scout troop that we're supporting, or, oh, we're teaching teens how to become advocates in the community. People go, oh, that's bullshit. And, what about the guns? What about the guns? What about the guns? Because they can't even process anything that doesn't have a bit of excitement. Nobody pays attention to anything I say when I say, oh, I do community work. But the minute I say, oh, I'm an ER doc and I worked at Cook County Hospital in Chicago, and that's where I train, and I'm at Kings County, all of a sudden they go, oh, now when they tell me some stories about what kind of stuff that you see. Not the success stories about the long, drawn-out times where we're working with a person. And the clients that we work with, you might be working with somebody for years before you have this achieved level of success. So you have to invest in the non-sexy stuff. My staff, they clown me. They go, "Oh, you keep talking about sexy," but people don't pay attention to the other stuff. And so, but that has to be of paramount importance and support.
The thing is, people in society, the public, are very reactive. It takes time to actually see if certain programs are going to work, and there might be some setbacks as a result. It shouldn't necessarily be that your immediate reaction is that, oh, this is failing, we gotta go back to police deterrence and more prison time. It's gonna take time to see which diversion programs are going to work, and sustaining those programs through research and through money. And I think that, some of them don't work, right? The reality is some of them don't work. There might be too many programs, there might not be enough investment and enough oversight. And so there needs to continue to be that investment in seeing if a new program and a new approach is actually going to work when you're talking about systemic structural problems with our society that go way farther back than Eric Gonzalez's term. So, without commenting at this point about any endorsements of any kind, those are the things that we will be looking at in terms of what are people's policies, positions, and what is their long-term versus short-term strategy?
I think you want a DA as well who understands what collateral consequences are. If you're, arrested and charged and you're in front of a DA at this point, you're kind of far along in the process. And there's something called prosecutorial discretion. So we do not have to, we shouldn't be over-policing. We can't be overcharging people either. If it's a nonviolent offense, pardon me, thanks for that water, actually.
Good timing.
But if it's a nonviolent offense, why are we jailing folks, for example, if it's a marijuana possession case for 5, 10, 15 years? When the mental shift now is we should be legalizing marijuana or decriminalizing it wherever you stand. So you want a DA. Yeah. So, but you really want a DA who is committed to not basically locking up folks and throwing away the key. That's the core question.
Yes.
I think I heard you say briefly that school gun violence programs traumatize the students that are being taught these rituals for safety. Just a point of information, I grew up in the late 40s, early 50s. We had to duck and cover because we were going to get bombed, and that was the world we lived in.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm okay. It's a different time. Your society is different than the one I grew up in. But do these training programs hurt the students?
Well, I think I was the one that said that active shooter drills have, the research is showing that active shooter, so we're talking about like lockdown drills, and they're in some states and some schools, they're actually acting out what would happen if there was a mass shooter with props and whatnot, right? So it's an enhanced fire drill, but really getting the students involved in this, possibility of a school shooting. And the reality is that our country has a disproportionate number of school shootings and mass shootings, without a question, right? But it is. It's just a small percent of the amount of gun violence and violence that's actually happening in our country. And in terms of what's actually going to be effective at preventing them is a whole other question. But telling our children at a very small age that they should go hide in a closet is not going to be the answer in terms of actually preventing someone with an assault weapon coming into the school. And frankly, especially in New York, I'm not gonna sit here and say that we don't need to be taking steps to prevent mass shootings in New York. We do, but we have an assault weapons ban, and it's effective. So you do not see that kind of violence, and it's for a reason, right?
I just think that also is like counterproductive as well. Like if you think about what happens when there's a school shooting, the majority of people just go out and buy more guns, right? It's about fear. So if you have a bunch of 5 and 6-year-old students hiding underneath desks, what you're doing is making them fearful of what might happen or what is to come, and that's literally just teaching young people to purchase guns to protect themselves. Like you're doing exactly what you're trying not to do. So if you just think about how that works, right? Just young people in general, if we're constantly giving young people the charge of keeping themselves safe all the time. Like you have to be able to do this, you have to be able to do that, you have to hide here. That's how you're going to be safe. All you're doing is is creating these young people to be so fearful of going to school or and what happens when you're afraid, you pick up a gun, you buy a gun, and that's just what's happening. It's a cycle. It's a cycle that continues to happen. And obviously, someone is benefiting off of it, right? It's not us.
And right, like security companies that are profiting and surveillance companies that want to implement certain levels of surveillance and technology in cities. They want to invest a lot more money in that than they do in actually providing resources and support in marginalized communities. That's problematic, even if it's effective. I think that again, it just always comes back to what does the research say, and there's certainly a deficit of research in New York and across the country because the CDC doesn't have the funding to actually do the research that they need to do. Every other public health epidemic has been researched heavily by the CDC, and then that data is relied on for there to be certain levels of policy reform, and we have not been able to do that. New York has been a little bit more upfront. We got $250,000 in funding for gun violence research prevention work in New York State, but that's really not a lot of money either. And that's one of the policy initiatives that we're working on is trying to get more funding for research. There is research and data showing what actually does prevent school shootings, will prevent an active shooting drill, right? And That includes policy reform, like the Extreme Risk Protection Order bill that we got passed into law here in New York, which actually gives individuals a tool, both family members, household members, law enforcement, and here in New York, school officials, the ability to use the court system to get an order and temporarily remove guns from an individual who's been shown to be in crisis. That is a tool that will actually help keep guns out of the hands of someone who has a pattern of dangerous behavior. But that's just one approach, right? And then there are some studies that are showing what actually could help prevent an active shooter from entering the school if it was confronted, which could include a single point of entry. But again, surveillance cameras everywhere, having metal detectors when you walk into the school, and honestly, you know, the schools that are most concerned about active shooter drills, they don't have metal detectors. But if you go to the schools that we're in, it feels like you're walking into a prison. And to be honest with you, it's not because they're trying to protect the students. They are afraid of the students. And if you walk into school and you feel like you are walking into a place where people are afraid of you and the administration is afraid of you, that creates a whole mindset of criminalization that is not going to lead to success. Whether it's having metal detectors that you have to go through every day, or a literal police station, you know, where you're registering for school people in uniform. So those are just some of the things that we need to think about when we talk about school safety more broadly, especially in New York City. Yes, you had your hand.
So thank you for being here and the incredible work you're doing, which is an understatement. Wondering how we can clone all of your programs and you. I mean, seriously, just to that point, you know, I mean, you mentioned funding, I think. You said 36 million, that's from the city.
Yeah.
So that's funding these programs here.
That's all city.
Pardon?
That's all city funding.
Right. And then grant writing, I know, is additional. So I'm just trying to get a sense of where are the programs and organizations that you represent. Where are you in the city, or is it in all the boroughs, or where do you need to be, and how does that kind of match with the funding that's needed, or, you know, I'm just trying to get a logistical.
Well, Man Up Incorporated is located in 2 different target areas in East New York. Well, Man Up Incorporated is located in 2 different target areas in East New York. And they're both in the 75th precinct. One is in Linden houses and Boulevard houses, and the other is in Unity Plaza housing. But you hit something in my mind. I tell a lot of people, yeah, of course, some more funding would help, and to have Man Up everywhere would be beautiful.
Yes.
But if you believe in decreasing the shootings and killings in the neighborhood, and you love, and you just spread love on your own, you don't have to be with Man Up to do what Man Up is doing. You know, if you see someone that's extremely angry, and you know that person is more than likely to resort to handling something that way, then you can be the one that's close to him and be the one to say, hey, listen, man, you don't have to do that. It may not stop it. You may not reach everybody, but
It's
if
a
you're
start.
spreading that love, like, love is just as contagious as the violence is. So that's what I would
I have a tremendous amount of respect for Brother Curly here, and I agree with you. I'm gonna be a little more direct though. We need money. We need a lot more money. And, you know, I sort of talked about that from an investment perspective, and I feel the need to talk about it. You know, the reality is, since the early 90s, policy organizations have all been pushing for universal background checks.
Right.
And while we have made headway, we still don't have universal background checks in Washington. And yet so much of the money continues to be poured into larger national organizations, all for the same policy reform. I'm not suggesting that doesn't need to continue. We need to continue to invest money. I know that some of the bigger organizations have really invested a lot of money in helping and endorsing candidates that are not going to be supported by the NRA. That's important from a political perspective. But the discrepancy, the disparity between how much money these organizations are getting and how much money is being put into one policy that still has not been enacted is problematic. I can tell you that we have 5 people in our office. We're a statewide organization, but we have 5 paid people. Shayna is running around constantly. We need more
Right.
money to increase our capacity,
I mean,
right?
any-
We're going from
any-
7 to 40 schools.
Right.
We should be hiring
Any
more
mayor,
people.
governor, whatever would be crazy not to, or city, you know, would be crazy not to fund, you know, your programs as models for around the country. You know what I mean?
One second. They're actually saying that New York is one of the safest, if not the safest city in the country right now. And if you look at the target areas that any one of the care of violence sites within the crisis management system are located, the shootings are extremely down. Like the
Yeah.
two catchment areas or target areas that Man Incorporated is working, that's the 75th precinct. If you do your history and your homework on the 75th precinct, those are areas that are, you know, that's what we were known for. Like being
Right.
extremely violent, the shootings and killings were extremely high. That's the history of the 75th precinct. And if you look at the map, if you take out a map and you put down, like we just had, like Brother Dawood was saying, in both target areas, we just reached 2 years without a killing or a homicide inside those target areas. Unfortunately, 2 days ago, we suffered one right in East New York on Pennsylvania and Dumont Avenue, which was a close friend of mine. But if you really do the homework, it's working. The crisis management system, because it's not just about the care of violence model. Now we call it the crisis management system because we're providing those resources for these individuals.
Yeah.
Getting them off the streets.
So important.
You know, having stuff to consume their time with other than just being out there wasting time. I always see my young brothers and sisters and I tell them, make sure you're walking with a purpose. I don't just say hello to you or what's up or how you doing just to say it. I'll say, how's your day? How today go? How was school? We say, oh, okay, good. That's not enough for me. Break that down for me a little bit. Like, give me some more. What made it okay? Are you okay? Is everything going? Are your grades? What's up with the honor roll? Are we talking about the honor roll even? No, why not? You know, I'm not even thinking about that. Why not? It's possible for you. You know what I'm saying? Let's engage in the conversation more and keep the effectiveness going because it's working.
So on the
I was going to say, which is where our program's located. We serve Kings County Hospital, and the patients who come to Kings County Department of Emergency Medicine come from over the entire borough, including Queens, because if Brookdale Hospital is on diversion and you have something that took place a little bit further east, and that stuff is going to come to Kings County Hospital. Our school-based initiatives are within East Flatbush at the Wingate High School campus, and we work with a few of the schools in that building, and also over in Ocean Hill, Brownsville, and Eagle Academy, which is over on Saratoga.
We're everywhere as well. Honestly, to give you guys an idea of what my week looks like, but you know, we're literally we're in Wingate as well, 600 Kingston Avenue, and Crown Heights, Flatbush. Sometimes I don't know where that is. We're also in, you know, in North Bronx and Evander Childs and Gun Hill Road. We are in Williamsburg Charter School, which is not Williamsburg; it's actually Bushwick. It's literally across the street from Bushwick houses. You know, we are in Jamaica High School. You know, we are in Flushing, Queens, and none of the students who go to the school that, you know, in Flushing, Queens, live in Flushing. So we literally, we you know, 5 days a week, 4 out of the 5 days a week, you know, me and my partner, we are going to see 2 or 3 schools a day in different boroughs. So we definitely targeting, you know, communities that are disproportionately affected by gun violence. We're in those schools, and we're doing the work. I mean, just thinking about funding, I know Rebecca, we said we need the funding, but I do think that, like, our biggest advocates have always been our students, right? Our students want our program. Our students go to their principals and their vice principals and they beg for our program to come back throughout the year. So I do know that, you know, I think parents are probably our biggest resources. So if the parents can say and talk to how successful they think the program has been, even the principals and the teachers can talk about how successful the program has been, it might, you know, change something with the Board of Ed, and, you know, maybe they can actually support it.
Public Advocate's Office.
Public Advocate's Office to get some funding from the Board of Ed to, you know, to create,
to grow it and expand and
actually really be a part of the Board of Education's curriculum, you know.
So I'll be quick on the issue of funding, and it sounds cliche to say call your council member, but this is real. Let me just break it down very quickly. So the city has a budget process where they figure out what they want to fund. It goes from March to June of every single year. So you want to call your council member in like January and say, hey, I love Nichols Against Gun Violence, Dr. Gore's group, Man Up Inc. I need you to push the speaker of the city council to negotiate with the mayor to increase the pot of money that the system gets. So 36 sounds like a lot, but it's not quite a lot when you have about 22 programs. That's about a little less than $1 billion per site. So that's some practical advice. Talk to your council member about increased funding for the CMS program.
And our council member happens to be the city council.
Yeah.
I mean, the speaker.
Take this a step further, because one of the things that we do as advocates is we help organize meetings to meet with your city council member and your state legislator or your federal legislator. And people always want to know, what can I do now? Like, this is really informative. It would be amazing if you brought us, you know, take us on the road, bring us to other communities around New York.
But something you can do is you can call me and I will help organize a meeting in person with your city council member and your state legislator so that you can advocate for funding, not just for New Yorkers Against Gun Violence, but for CAVI and Man Up and the, I think, 38 other community-based organizations that are doing the violence intervention work around this city. That is part of our mission, is not just lobbying for laws, it's lobbying for programs. And we need your help, we need constituents from each of these districts to do that, and I would be happy to help organize those meetings.
One thing you brought up just about the funding issue. In order to keep these programs afloat, yes, you need to have money, but that money has to come from multiple sources. We start off very, very grassroots, like paying out of your own pocket just to keep things up and running and paying staff members out of your own pockets. And when your money only comes from one source, particularly just the public sector, you can't keep your program afloat. We've all experienced these situations where we've had to let go of staff members because the funding didn't come through, because we're waiting for it to come through the city and all the different channels. And so, had it not been for some private funding and fundraising from just regular fundraising efforts, we wouldn't be able to keep our doors open. But if we just only relied on funding coming from one specific area, whether it's funding only coming from the city and not coming from the state, funding coming from the state but not coming from a private foundation, you can't continue to do the work. And the consistency which is needed to keep our people safe and engaged, that money has to be there. If you know that your staff can't function, can't take care of their own family members because their family members have to eat and they got to pay their rent and pay their bills and pay for their kids' clothing, if they're not getting paid, they can't continue to do the work. It's not. People expect people to do these Herculean efforts just because we're from the community and these are our neighborhoods and we need to do this, and we do that stuff. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to take care of your own personal needs.
Yeah.
So that's something that we're trying to make sure comes to be.
So I'm getting the
Okay.
this, and so we are gonna wrap it up, but I'm happy to stick around to answer questions, maybe some of the other panelists will too. And I will say, if you would like to make a donation to New Yorkers Against Gun Violence so we can continue to do more panels like this and do the work that we're doing, you can make a donation back there where Phil, one of our board members, is. You'll get a t-shirt and a bracelet, and it will help us not only do advocacy work for our own program, but also for the programs that are sitting up here. Yes, Deb?
We also have a flyer with all of these websites, so if you'd like more information, there's a flyer up there, and you could get in touch with everybody here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.